This week's challenge is all about getting our data in the right shape. So we've got a number of different responses to a survey, which is to do with your personality traits. And so we've got all the codes going across the top. So basically each question going on the top. That's not necessarily the best shape for our data to be in. We prefer our data to be tall and thin rather than wide and short. And so we're going to definitely need to reshape this data. But before we do that, we've got no way of uniquely identifying each participant at the moment. So first of all, we put on a record ID called rename it to be user, and then we can transpose by selecting, to group by our user up here, and then all of our columns about the different questions go here. So we can see now that our data is tall and wide. It's gone from having 99 records to 9,990. Oh, sorry, 9,900. I can't read. And that's just a much better structure for our data to be in. So if we take a look at our question lookup table, we can see all of those codes there as well for each question. So we kind of know that we're on the right lines reshaping our data like that, because now this code field could be joined to our name field here. And that would all join nicely, and we could get that extra information about what the questions actually are coming from there. But as you can see, that's not how we've structured this workflow. So we'll move on to the final input that is given to us, which is giving us all of the kind of whether it's a positive or negative influence, and what type of factor it is, basically like extroversion or agreeableness, etc. and so forth. So this data almost has the opposite problem in that it is very tall and thin, but it's kind of got all the information that we need, not on a row by row basis. For example, if I'm looking at am the life of the party, then the information that we need that it's a positive factor and that it's related to extroversion, that's all in other rows, whereas we would rather that information was in the same row. So to sort that out, we use a little bit of regex logic to pull out all the fields that have capital letters, because we can see that's where our agreeableness factor or our extroversion factor, they're always in all caps at the moment. So we use a little bit of regex saying, are all these things uppercase? And the 0 here is corresponding to the fact that we want it to be case sensitive, so that it pulls out only the correct results there. So we get our nice true and false, and we can use that to then kind of fill down our extroversion factor using a multi-row formula tool. So we can see that our formula is just saying if we've got true here, then bring out field 1 to here, whereas if it's false, then take the row above. And that gives us all the correct factors, basically. We filter out that one where the extroversion factor is equal to the extroversion factor. We don't need those rows, so they get filtered out. They're basically just our headers, and then we're left with all that information helpfully in a column. So now I can tell that am I the life of the party is an extroversion factor by looking across the row rather than having to look up or down in that field. We do exactly the same thing for positive and negative that we have there. We're just saying if that field contains positive or if it contains negative. Could have said if field 1 equals positive or field 1 equals negative, but I believe one of these rows had trailing or leading white space associated with the positive factor. There you go. So I used a contains rather than equals just so that we didn't have to do any trimming of that field, but not necessarily necessary. We do the same thing with the multi-row formula and filtering it out, and then we get to our 3 columns, which is more useful. Now, I've done a very inefficient thing here where for each of these lookup codes, I append all of these 50 different questions, and then I say if this question field contains field 1, then only keep those in, and we get back down to our 50 rows. A much better way to do that would have been using the find and replace tool. Don't know why I didn't, but anyway. So now that we've got all of that information about all the different codes and questions, then we can use this code here to join it onto our user responses. And that all works nicely. And we can use that to multiply our negative values by -1 so that when we aggregate those up, then we get our sort of score for each user for each of those factors. We then use a text input to input that information that we're being given here about those different numbers that need to be added on to the scores. So we join that in, add that on, and just reshape our data so that it matches the output. And it's as simple as that. Thanks for listening and hope that was useful.